Tonight, somewhere in the world, a history textbook tells a simple story. America fought for freedom. America won. The end. But that version leaves out something extraordinary. It leaves out the part where the most powerful military force on the planet lost to an army that was, at various points, barefoot, starving, unpaid, and outnumbered. The real story of how America won its independence is not a story about courage alone. It is a story about strategy, desperation, unlikely alliances, and a series of decisions so audacious they should not have worked. And yet, they did. Let us go back. The year is 1775. Britain is not just a country, it is an empire. The most powerful empire on earth. Its navy rules the seas. Its professional army is among the best trained in the world. It has money, it has supply lines, it has experience. It has won wars on multiple continents. When it turns its attention to 13 small colonies along the eastern seaboard of North America, the outcome seems obvious to almost everyone watching. This should be over quickly. The colonists, on the other hand, have almost nothing. They have farmers with muskets. They have merchants who have never commanded a battalion. They have no navy to speak of, no national treasury, no gunpowder factories producing enough ammunition to sustain a prolonged conflict. What they have is anger. What they have is geography. And what they have, though they do not yet fully understand it, is a fundamentally different kind of war to fight. Here is the first thing you need to understand. Britain did not just need to defeat the Continental Army. Britain needed to crush a revolution. Those are two entirely different problems. Historian John Ferling, who spent decades studying the Revolutionary War, argued that Britain's strategic failure was baked into the very nature of the conflict. You can defeat an army in a battle. You cannot defeat an idea in a battle. And independence had become an idea that was spreading faster than redcoats could march. George Washington understood something early that changed everything. He could not beat the British Army in a straight fight. He did not try to. Instead, he adopted what military historians now call a Fabian strategy, named after the Roman general Quintus Fabius Maximus, who famously refused to engage Hannibal directly and instead wore him down through delay, retreat, and attrition. Washington's job was not to win. His job was to not lose. As long as the Continental Army existed, the revolution existed. Every time he slipped away from a trap, every time he kept his army alive through another brutal winter, he was winning in a way that the British generals did not fully recognize until it was too late. But survival alone could not win the war. Something else had to happen. Think about the map. Britain is fighting a war 3,000 miles from home across an ocean. Its supply ships take weeks to arrive. When a British general in New York needs reinforcements, he cannot simply send a message and receive them the next morning. He waits, he adjusts, he improvises. And the longer the war goes on, the more those logistical delays compound into catastrophic miscommunications. Military historian David Hackett Fisher, in his landmark study of Washington's early campaigns, documented how the British command structure suffered repeatedly from the sheer distance between London and the battlefield. Orders arrived outdated. Opportunities vanished. The empire was simply too far away to react with the speed the war demanded. And then there is the terrain. The American countryside did not cooperate with European military tactics. British generals had been trained to fight in open fields, where massed formations could maneuver in tight, disciplined lines and deliver synchronized volleys of fire. The forests of New England, the swamps of South Carolina, the mountain passes of upstate New York, none of these looked like a European battlefield. They looked like a nightmare. American militias knew this terrain the way you know your own neighborhood. They knew where to hide. They knew where to ambush. They knew how to melt back into the woods and vanish before a counterattack could be organized. Francis Marion, the man history would call the swamp fox, made this into an art form. Operating in South Carolina, Marion led small raiding parties that struck British supply lines, freed prisoners, and disappeared into the coastal swamps before the British could organize a pursuit. His tactics were so effective and so maddening that British officer Banastre Tarleton famously admitted that the devil himself could not catch him. Marion had no formal military training in the European tradition. He simply used what he knew, and what he knew was the land. But here is the twist that most people miss. The Americans could not have won this war alone. France changed everything. When France formally entered the war on the side of the Americans in 1778, the entire nature of the conflict shifted. Suddenly, Britain was not fighting a colonial rebellion, it was fighting a world war. France had not forgotten the humiliation of the 7 Years' War, during which it had lost enormous territories to Britain. This was revenge dressed up as ideology. France supplied the Continental Army with weapons, money, and professional military advisors. The Marquis de Lafayette arrived not as a curiosity, but as a serious military figure who helped transform how Washington trained and organized his forces. French naval power threatened British supply lines in ways that American ships never could. Historian Robert Middlecoff, in his exhaustive account of the Revolutionary War, described the French alliance as the single most decisive external factor in the American victory. Without French money, the Continental Army might have collapsed entirely from financial strangulation. Without the French Navy, the trap at Yorktown could never have been set. And that brings us to October 1781. Yorktown. British General Charles Cornwallis has marched his army into Virginia and camped at a small tobacco port on the York River. He is waiting for reinforcements and supplies to arrive by sea. What he does not know is that the French fleet, commanded by Admiral de Grasse, has just won a naval engagement at the Battle of the Chesapeake, cutting off the British supply line from the sea. Washington, who has been in the north near New York, makes a decision that historians still marvel at. He pivots. Secretly, he moves his entire army along with French ground forces under Rochambeau, hundreds of miles south, without the British in New York realizing where they are going until it is far too late. When Cornwallis finally grasps what has happened, he is surrounded. 8,000 British troops face a combined Franco-American force of nearly twice that number. There is no relief coming from the sea. There is no escape to the north. On October 19th, 1781, Cornwallis surrenders. His officers, according to historical accounts, played a tune called "The World Turned Upside Down" as they marched out to lay down their arms. The choice of song was not accidental. They knew exactly how strange this outcome was. But why had it gone this way? Why had the most powerful empire on earth lost? The British public was exhausted. The war had gone on for years and was costing an extraordinary amount of money. British politicians who had opposed the war from the beginning grew louder with every passing season. The Prime Minister, Lord North, had never been fully enthusiastic about the war and struggled to maintain political support for it. When news of Yorktown reached London, North reportedly cried out that it was all over. He was right. Not because Britain could not theoretically keep fighting, but because the political will to do so had finally collapsed. Here is something worth sitting with. The American Revolution did not end because of one great battle. It ended because a revolutionary army made it too costly, too complicated, too endless for an empire to justify continuing. The Americans did not need to outfight Britain. They needed to outlast it. And they did. There is a lesson buried in this that reaches far beyond 1781. When you are outmatched, the strategy that gets you killed is trying to fight the opponent's game. Washington did not try to out-British the British. He fought a different war entirely. He fought a war of endurance and adaptation and alliance building and terrain. He fought the war that he could actually win, rather than the war that looked most impressive. The next time you face something that seems impossibly stacked against you, remember that the Continental Army was broke, freezing, underfed, and outnumbered. Remember that at Valley Forge in the winter of 1777 to 1778, soldiers were dying not from battle wounds but from cold and disease. Remember that Washington wrote letter after desperate letter to the Continental Congress begging for supplies that were slow to arrive. And remember that this army, this exhausted, underfunded, improvised collection of farmers and tradesmen and idealists, somehow did not quit. The British expected a short war. They got a long one. And in the gap between those two expectations, a nation was born.